Why do people still search for Eden?
Not to prove faith. Not to win arguments. Not to place a pin on map and say, here it is. People search for Eden because Eden is the beginning of a question that never left us.
Where did we come from? What kind of world did humanity begin in? And what did we lose?
Some are curious, some are skeptical, some are deeply religious, others are not religious at all. And many don't even know why this question keeps returning. If Eden was only a myth,
why does it appear with such concrete detail? Rivers, geography, direction, resources.
And if Eden was real, why does the text never seem interested in proving it? This is where most discussions fail. They rush toward answers before understanding the purpose of the question. So let's pause.
Because before asking where Eden was, we should ask something more important.
What are we actually looking for?
Are we searching for a lost place? Or are we searching for coherence between what the text describes and the world we inhabit? This video does not attempt to declare a final location. It does not claim certainty, and it does not ask you to accept a conclusion. Instead, it invites you to walk through the text carefully, observe what it actually says, and ask whether its descriptions can still speak meaningfully today. Not as dogma, not as debate fuel, but as a puzzle, a sacred puzzle. One that may reveal less about geography and more about how humanity once lived in relation to the Creator and to the land itself.
Only after understanding why Eden matters can we responsibly ask how the text describes it and what kind of world it points to. So let's begin there. Not with a map, not with a claim, but with the question the text quietly places before us. Before we open any sacred texts, it's important to admit something honestly. We are not the first to look for Eden. For centuries, scholars, historians, theologians, explorers, and even entire institutions have tried to identify where Eden might have been. Some placed it in Mesopotamia, others in Africa, some in the Armenian highlands. Some argued it never existed on Earth at all. Each proposal came with maps, arguments, and confidence. And yet, none of them settled the question. They began with a location, and then searched the text for support. When the rivers did not fit, they were reinterpreted. When the geography conflicted, it was explained away. When uncertainty appeared, it was treated as a problem to eliminate. Over time, this created camps, people defending regions, people defending traditions, people defending conclusions. And slowly, the text itself became secondary. This video does not dismiss those studies. Many of them are serious, detailed, and thoughtful. But their existence tells us something important. Perhaps the problem is the direction of the search. Instead of asking, where can we place Eden? We might need to ask, what kind of place does the text describe?
That is a very different question. It does not demand a winner. It does not force agreement, and it allows the text to speak before the map is opened.
So rather than adding one more claim to a long list of claims, this approach does something simpler. It steps back, it listens, and it asks whether the descriptions in the text form a coherent picture of a world that could exist on Earth without forcing that picture onto a single point. Only after understanding those descriptions can any location be discussed responsibly. That is where we turn next. Not to conclusions, but to the puzzle itself.
To read a sacred text responsibly, we need to agree on one thing first. The text is not trying to impress us. It is not written to satisfy modern science. It does not argue. It does not defend itself. It simply describes. And it does so in a very particular way. In the early verses of Genesis, the text does not begin with rivers or geography. It begins with condition: no shrubs, no cultivated plants, no rain. And yet, the land is already being watered. The text is explicit. Water does not come from the sky. It comes from below. Streams rise from the ground and water the whole surface of the land. This is not metaphorical language. It is not poetic symbolism. It is a description of method.
Only after this system is established does the text introduce a garden, and the garden is not described as the whole world. It is planted. It is placed. It is specific. The text is careful with its words. It distinguishes between the land, the garden, and the region in which the garden exists. Then, and only then, a river is mentioned. Not many rivers, a river. The text does not explain where it begins. It does not name it. It does not emphasize it. It simply states its function. The river waters the garden. After that, it divides. 4 branches are named, each associated with regions, resources, and directions.
This sequence matters. Water first. Life follows. Structure emerges. If we read the text too quickly, we miss this logic. If we focus only on the names of rivers, we ignore the system that makes them possible.
So, instead of treating this passage as a list of clues to decode aggressively, we approach it as a puzzle that reveals its picture gradually, not by force, but by coherence. At this stage, we are not asking, where is this on a map? We are asking, what kind of environment is being described? A land sustained without rain, a garden supplied from below, a water system that precedes agriculture, a river that exists as function, not as identity. Only after understanding these characteristics can we responsibly compare them to the real world. That comparison comes later. For now, the puzzle is still forming. If we set aside maps and names for a moment, the text has already given us a clear framework. It describes a world with water, but without rain. A land that is alive, before human cultivation begins. This immediately rules out many assumptions. The system does not depend on seasonal weather. It does not rely on clouds or storms. Its source is stable, constant, and underground. In modern terms, this points toward deep groundwater systems. Aquifers, subsurface channels, pressurized water rising naturally to the surface. The text also describes scale. The water does not irrigate a small patch. It waters the whole surface of the land before the garden is even planted. That suggests a regional system, not a local spring. Then comes the garden. The garden is not described as wild land. It is organized, maintained, purposeful. The human role is not to create life, but to work and care for what already exists. This implies stability, a place where water flow is reliable, where vegetation can grow without constant intervention, where life is sustained naturally. Finally, the river system. One river serves the garden. Afterward, it divides into 4. The text does not say the rivers originate separately. It presents them as branches of a single system.
This matters. It suggests a hydrological network that feeds multiple river basins from a shared source. Such systems are rare, but they are not imaginary. They exist in regions shaped by deep geology, tectonic pressure, and long-term water movement beneath the surface.
At this point, we still have no location, but we do have criteria. No rain-dependent ecology, subsurface water supply, regional hydrological influence, a centralized system that later disperses. These are not theological claims. They are observations drawn directly from the text. Only now, with these characteristics clearly in mind, does it make sense to look outward, not to prove the text, but to see whether the world we inhabit contains environments that resemble what is being described. That comparison is the next step. With these characteristics in mind, we can now look at the world around us, not to confirm a belief, not to declare a discovery, but to ask a simple question. Do environments like this exist on Earth? When we examine global hydrology, most landscapes depend on rainfall. Rivers rise in mountains, fed by snow and storms. Vegetation follows climate. But a small number of regions operate differently. In these places, water is stored deep underground, moving slowly through rock layers before emerging at the surface. Life there does not wait for rain. It responds to pressure, geology, and time. Some of these systems supply multiple river basins at once. The rivers themselves may appear separate on the surface, but below ground, they are part of a shared structure. This is not speculation. It is a known feature of complex geological regions. Now, notice what the text does not do. It does not name the original river. It does not celebrate it. It does not describe its length or destination. The river exists only to serve the garden. Its importance is functional, not symbolic. This detail often gets overlooked, because when a system is stable and assumed, it does not need explanation. Only the branches are named because only the branches matter. Once the water leaves the garden, this shifts how we read the passage. The focus is not on identifying a river, the focus is on understanding a system. At this stage, it would be premature to highlight any specific region. That comes later, and only as an example of how such systems appear in reality. For now, what matters is this: the description in the text does not contradict how Earth works. It does not require miracles of physics. It does not rely on mythological geography. It describes a type of environment that is rare but possible. And that realization alone changes how the story is often dismissed. The puzzle is no longer whether Eden could exist. The question becomes, why was it lost?
At this point, the structure of the passage becomes clearer. The text does not describe 4 rivers coming together. It describes one system, then 4 outcomes. First, water rises from the ground and waters the land. Then a garden is planted. Then a river serves that garden, and only after that does the river divide into 4 branches. This order is deliberate. The text does not say the 4 rivers originate independently. It does not say they are born in separate mountains. It does not describe 4 sources. It describes division, not convergence. This distinction is critical, because many interpretations unconsciously reverse the flow.
They begin with known rivers and try to trace them backward until they meet. But the text moves in the opposite direction. It begins with an unseen source, a system already active, already sustaining life. Only later do named rivers appear, and those names matter less than we often assume. They are markers of direction and region, not proof of origin. The original river remains unnamed because it does not function as a landmark. It functions as infrastructure. This also explains why the text feels unconcerned with helping us locate Eden precisely. Its concern is relational, not cartographic. It tells us how life was sustained, how order preceded labor, and how abundance existed before human effort or rain. When read this way, the river is not mysterious. It is intentionally understated. The mystery is not where it was, but how such a system could exist and then cease to function as before. Because the text moves on, it does not describe drought. It does not describe collapse. It describes removal. Humanity is taken out of the garden, and access is closed. Which raises an important question. If the system itself remained, what changed? And if the system did change, how would that change appear in the land? Those questions lead us away from names and toward processes, not theology versus science, but text and world speaking to one another. That is where the next step takes us.
Systems like this do not disappear quietly. A landscape sustained by underground water does not simply fade over time. If it changes, the change is sudden. The text does not describe environmental decline. It does not mention drying land or failing water. It describes a decisive moment.
Humanity is removed from the garden. Access is closed, guarded. This is not presented as punishment alone. It is presented as separation. And separation implies danger. The text tells us why this happened. Disobedience, deception, a rupture in trust between humanity and the Creator.
What the text does not describe is how the land itself responded, but it allows us to consider something important. If the system that sustained the garden depended on pathways beneath the surface, then those same pathways could also become channels of destruction. In geology, the same fractures that release water can later release pressure, heat, and fire.
A fissure that once gave life can become a vent. Water can become steam. Steam can become force. This does not replace the theological cause. It does not diminish divine agency. It simply describes how a change in order could manifest in the physical world. In this reading, the guardians at the edge of the garden are not only symbols of judgment, they are also boundaries of mercy, because a place where life once flowed freely could quickly become uninhabitable. The text does not say humanity was expelled into safety. It says humanity was kept away from something no longer meant for them. This allows both dimensions to remain true. The loss of Eden is moral, and the disappearance of the garden could be physical, not because nature overpowered God, but because the system itself was never independent of Him. The land did not fail. The relationship did. And when that relationship changed, the world we inherited was no longer the same world described at the beginning. This is not a conclusion. It is a reflection, one that invites humility before both text and terrain. After the garden is closed, the text moves on. Life continues. Humanity spreads. Civilizations rise. But Eden is never returned to. Not because it vanished from memory, but because it no longer functioned as it once did. What remains are traces, not the garden itself, but echoes of a system that once sustained life without rain. Across different regions of the world, we find stories of a fertile beginning, of a place where water was abundant and life flourished effortlessly. These are not proofs, they are patterns, and patterns invite comparison.
In some landscapes, rivers today appear smaller than what ancient descriptions suggest. Channels exist that seem oversized for the water they now carry. This hints at past flows that were greater, more forceful, or more stable. Geology reminds us of something the text implies.
The Earth is not static. Faults shift, plates move, subsurface systems reorganize. When this happens, water routes change. A source that once fed multiple directions can be sealed, diverted, or transformed. The garden does not need to be erased to be lost. It only needs to become inaccessible, unstable, or dangerous. This helps explain the silence of the text. There is no instruction to return. No map is preserved. No lineage is tasked with reclaiming it. Because Eden is not presented as a destination for humanity's future, it is presented as a reference point, a reminder of what life was like when provision came directly from below, when work followed abundance, and when humanity lived within limits it did not create.
What follows is a different world. A world of rain, of labor, of adaptation. The question is no longer where Eden was. The question becomes what kind of relationship it represented.
At this stage, it becomes tempting to draw conclusions, to point to a place, to name a region, to say, this is it. But that would undo everything we've done so far. Because the purpose of this approach is not to force the text onto the land, or the land back into the text. It is to let them speak to each other without pressure. When we look at the Earth through this lens, some regions simply resemble the kind of system the text describes, more closely than others, not as proof, not as certainty, but as correspondence. One such example is found in regions shaped by deep tectonic activity, where multiple river systems emerge from complex underground water networks. Eastern Anatolia is one of these regions. This does not mean Eden was there. It does not mean the garden can be identified. It simply means that landscapes exist, where water rises from below, feeds multiple basins, and does so without depending solely on rainfall. Within such regions, areas like Bengal help illustrate how a single underground system can give rise to rivers that appear unrelated on the surface. This is not a claim, it is a demonstration, a way to show that the description in the text is not disconnected from the physical world. At the same time, this approach demands restraint. Once we begin naming places, we must also accept uncertainty. Geology changes, hydrology shifts. Ancient systems may no longer exist as they once did. The text does not ask us to solve this. It asks us to notice it, to recognize that a world sustained differently than our own is not an impossible idea, and that the loss of such a world does not require myth to be meaningful. By reading the land carefully, without turning it into an argument, we preserve the integrity of both faith and inquiry. What remains is not a map, it is perspective. After all of this, it's fair to ask a final question. Why does any of this matter? Not where Eden was, not which theory is strongest, not who is right, but why the text tells this story at all. Because the story of Eden is not preserved to satisfy curiosity. It is preserved to set a contrast. A world where provision came first and labor followed. A world sustained from below, not controlled from above. A world where humanity did not need to extract, dominate, or compete to survive. That world did not end because it was unstable. It ended because a boundary was crossed. The text is clear about this. What was lost was not just a place, but a way of being. And that loss shaped everything that followed. Rain replaces underground abundance. Labor replaces care. Distance replaces presence. Whether Eden was located in one region or another is ultimately secondary. Because the message does not depend on coordinates, it depends on recognition. Recognition that the text describes a coherent world. Recognition that this coherence does not vanish under scrutiny. And recognition that the story still speaks to how humanity relates to the land, to one another, and to the Creator. This video does not ask you to agree. It asks you to notice, to read carefully, to think slowly, to resist the urge to turn sacred texts into weapons or trophies. If Eden was real, its greatest lesson is not where it was. It is what kind of relationship made it possible, and whether humanity is willing to reflect on that once again.